let's talk about hell. I told you. I wasn't going to lie to you. No false promises here. Let's talk about hell for a moment. How many of you have heard or had it told to you that hell is a place of eternal damnation and torment? Hands? Once you go to hell, you're never getting out. How many of you heard that? More hands? All right. If you don't accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, you're going to go to hell. How many of you have heard that? Yeah. What if I told you that was all nonsense? Now, of course, I've been accused of preaching heresy from time to time, so I just want to warn you of that. One day's heresy is another day's orthodoxy. What I'm actually going back to is the early church fathers, who also didn't believe any of that. The earliest church did not teach that hell was eternal, that it was a place that once you went to, you never got out. They didn't teach any of that. No. Much of the ideas that we have about hell don't even come from the Bible. The Bible mentions Sheol, the place of the dead. The word hell actually is the Greco-Roman place of the dead. It's where you went when you died, right? And occasionally people point to Jesus mentioning Gehenna, which was an actual place in the day of Jesus. It was the garbage dump in the valley of Hinnom outside of the city of Jerusalem. And when Jesus makes that reference about where the flame is never quenched and the worm never dies, well, garbage dumps burn garbage and there's worms in them, right? So he was actually talking about a real place. So much of what we have in our popular imagination about hell is a relatively recent invention. I like to call it scare tactic Christianity, and I don't think it works. And did it work for you? No, that's why you're here in the Episcopal Church. That's right. No, it's nonsense, right? You know, I just don't buy that a loving God is going to turn around and rain eternal torment on people. In fact, St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of our early church Cappadocian fathers, even posited something that's called the fish hook theory, that God would bait a fish hook with Jesus and Satan would swallow it whole and be redeemed. Even Satan was going to get redeemed in the early church. So redemption is the point. But where do we come up with these ideas of hell? Let me suggest we come up with them by looking around and seeing everything that's gone wrong right here. We do not have to look far to see hell on earth. Don't believe me? Pull out your phone and look at the news. Look at the devastation in Gaza, mass graves in Syria, genocide in Sudan. Those are the really horrific things. The situation in Ukraine, all over the world. And while we don't necessarily have those sorts of horrors happening here, we have softer ones. As we've seen in the news recently, people dying due to health care being denied, gun violence happening all around us. Yeah, I think we actually are very capable of making hell on earth. Advent is a season where we focus on the last four things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. So, hey, you're on Hell Sunday. Welcome to All Saints. And this hell on earth is exactly what needs redemption. It is exactly the reason that Jesus came. So on this Sunday, when Mary is front and center with a story that's really familiar, very beloved out of the Gospel of Luke, I thought we would actually start the reading with a reading we did not read. I know, a little counterintuitive there. You see, it's Rector's choice this Sunday on whether to read a psalm or sing a psalm or read or sing the Magnificat. And we've actually been using the canticles. Canticles are poems in the Bible that are set to music. The Psalms are also poems set to music. So today I want to take a look just for a moment at this brief portion of Psalm 80 that we did not read because it was the optional reading. So if open up your books of common prayer, the red books with the cross on the front, to page 702. Because the first 7 verses of Psalm 80 were also prescribed as an alternate reading for today. And I want us to read this, and we're going to have a little fun with it, even though it's a lament psalm. I want the congregation to put your fingers at verse 3 and verse 7. Those are the 2 you're going to read because that's the refrain. So the whole group sings the refrain, right? And I'll read the rest of it. So 3 and 7, that's your part. And I'll read the remainder. Hear, O shepherd of Israel, leading Joseph like a flock. Shine forth, you that are enthroned upon the cherubim. In the presence of Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh, stir up your strength and come to help us. Restore us, O God of hosts. Show the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. O Lord God of hosts, how long will you be angered despite the prayers of your people? You have fed them with the bread of tears. You have given them bowls of tears to drink. You have made us the derision of our neighbors, and our enemies laugh us to scorn. Restore us, O God of hosts. Show the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. Ooh. Yeah, this is a classic lament psalm. A psalm, well, where basically the author is yelling at God, right? Yelling at God, shaking the fist. The psalmist, in a lament psalm, they begin by reminding God of who God is, the one who is a shepherd enthroned upon the cherubim. You are mighty, God, so stir up your strength and come help us. It's a demand. It is not polite. It's not a please. It's a demand. And verses 3 and 7, those are repeated throughout the remainder of the psalm. They're like a Greek chorus where we all say the refrain, restore us, restore us. We need your help. Psalmist goes on and asks the eternal question, how long? How long will it take you to get over your anger, God? How long will it be before you show up for your people? Your people have been crushed, and do you not care? Whew. Scholars believe this psalm was likely written around the time of the fall of the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, the first of the unthinkable conquests and deportations of God's chosen people by the Assyrians. Later, it would function as a lament when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Lament psalms take a particular form, and if you pay close attention, I would venture to say the majority of the psalms are lament psalms in one way or another. And the form is that God is reminded of who God is by the author. The complaint gets poured out, and then the author reminds God of how God acted in the past and demands that God shows up and start doing what God's supposed to do to save God's people. They're not polite. Many Christians get very uncomfortable with lament psalms because how many of you have been raised not to yell at God? Yeah, you're not supposed to say that. We're taught to be nice, to be polite, out of some misplaced fear that God will destroy us if we get a little too real or a little too honest. And this is an utterly ridiculous and twisted theology, as twisted as our ideas of hell. I mean, seriously, if your God is so small that your God can't handle your honest anger and grief, that God is not worthy of worship, and we should all just pack up and start going to brunch on Sundays instead of showing up here. I think our God is bigger than that. And this psalm gets at the heart of Advent. And it gets at the heart of what it means to cry out when you look around and you see the living hell all around us. It is a lament of displacement and alienation and the apparent silence of God. Advent is not a season for the faint of heart. It is a 4-week focused look into the utter abyss of the futility of human ways. This is a world that God created in love, but it has been distorted by the powers of sin and death, and it often makes it hard to see what's beloved. As theologian Fleming Rutledge puts it, we are a people who are living in a world which is now enemy-occupied territory. The enemy is sin and death, and the many and varied corrupting powers which they spawn: rapacious greed, violence, murder, hatred. We see the false gods the enemy dangles in front of us to be worshipped: profit margins, strong economy, shareholder value. These idols demand sacrifices too, like ignoring the climate crisis, accepting environmental destruction, turning a blind eye to gun violence, unless, of course, the victim is a CEO, and we pay attention to it, ignoring the unhoused, especially those with mental illness or addiction, denying the claims for life-saving health care. It goes on and on. A variety of sacrifices our modern world demands, and every one of them feed the idol of the bottom line. Yes, we are in enemy-occupied territory, or as W.H. Auden framed it in his work, For the Time Being, the pilgrim way has led to the abyss. The only rescue is through the impossible. Restore us, O God of hosts. Show the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. Which is exactly where Luke takes us this morning. Now, our lectionary gives gospel readings thematically in Advent, not sequentially. First, we start with the end of all things on Advent 1, then we get Advent 2 and 3 dedicated to John the Baptist each year, and the last Sunday devoted to the Annunciation and the immediate aftermath. Now, we touched on Zechariah, John's father, right? A couple of weeks ago, we sang the canticle of the song of Zechariah, but that comes after this story. Where we are in the narrative is that the angel Gabriel first comes to Zechariah in the temple, tells him Elizabeth, who was past the age of childbearing, would conceive a son. They would name him John, and he would be a prophet taking on the power of Elijah. When Zechariah asks, how can I know this will happen? He asks for a proof, right? Gabriel responds to this demand for proof by zipping Zechariah's lip. He is muted until John is born and named. Then Gabriel comes to Mary later, who rather than asking for proof just says, how can this work out? Because I'm a virgin. How's this going to happen? Gabriel lays out the plan, and Mary consents for this to be so. Do you notice? She consents to God's plan. God does not force this plan on Mary. God waits for Mary's yes. And as a side note, this is a radical departure from the common mythological origin narratives of the Roman Empire, which often had male gods committing acts of violence against earthly women for their progeny to be born. There is no violence in this story. No violence. Our God waits for our participation. And once Mary consents, Gabriel tells her of Elizabeth's pregnancy and says nothing is impossible with God. Now, I think Mary would have passed clinical pastoral education with flying colors, because we have a saying in CPE, trust but verify. So she's not taking some angel's word on this. No. She's going to go check it out. And she leaves. She goes off. She goes to the Judean hill country. No doubt she probably traveled with others. That's quite common. But there's no mention made of Joseph and no mention made of a father. There's no men in the picture. Sorry, guys. You get to be quiet today. Zechariah is mute. Joseph's absent. Nobody in the picture mansplaining the event. And when she arrives, her kinswoman Elizabeth greets her with a prophetic word. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy, and blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord. That unleashes Mary's quintessential protest song, the Magnificat. Like the psalmist in that song, she reminds God of who God is, the one who scatters the proud with the strength of his arm, who drags down the powerful off their thrones, lifts up the lowly, feeds the hungry, sends the rich away empty. Blessed is she who believed. See, Mary saw the hell around her too. She had a vision for something better. We who live in the enemy-occupied territory of this world often forget that this has always been so. We reside in an already but not yet existence between the earthly life of Jesus, his life, death, resurrection, and the completion of his work at his final revealing. And it's easy to be seduced by the distorted sentimentality of the American version of Christmas with its ever holly-jolliness. But that's a sentimentality, my friends, that simply did not exist in first century Judea. No. The world Jesus was born into was also enemy-occupied territory. The idols were different and the sacrifices demanded by them were different, but they were still death-dealing. Life was hard, and Jesus and his family, as subsistence peasants in Galilee, lived hard lives under the violent, dehumanizing boot heel of Roman occupation. Corruption and abusive power were just as rampant as they are today. But our hearts, then and now, cry out for a redemption that only the miraculous can accomplish. This is what is leading us to Christmas. As Auden wrote, we who must die demand a miracle. How could the eternal do a temporal act, the infinite become a finite fact? Nothing can save us that is possible. We who die must die demand a miracle. We who must die demand that God show up, because the possible cannot save us from ourselves. Restore us, O God of hosts. Show the light of your countenance, and we shall be saved. And blessed are we when we believe that God will show up.